The world told you to empty your mind. God told Joshua to fill his. And modern neuroscience is only now catching up to what your spirit always knew. Sit with that for a moment. Because everything you have been taught about the quiet place, the still place, the blank place, was aimed at the wrong door. You were told the goal was silence. The goal was never silence. You were told the goal was to become empty, to become a hollow reed, to erase yourself until nothing was left but breath and space, and a whole generation of tired, anxious, hungry believers went looking for peace by trying to become nothing. They came back more anxious than before, because an empty room does not stay empty. Something always moves in. There is a secret buried in the oldest command God ever gave a leader before he handed him a nation. It is a secret about the mind, about the mouth, about the hidden man of the heart. The church has largely lost it. The world has counterfeited it. And the enemy is betting the rest of your life that you never dig it back up. But you are about to, and once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Once you understand what meditation actually is, you will never again mistake emptiness for peace. So, before we go one sentence further, I want you to do something. Down in the comments, type one word. Type the word full. Just that. Because by the time we are finished, you will understand why that one word changes everything. Let me tell you exactly what you are walking out of this teaching with, because I do not want to waste your time, and I do not want to feed you inspiration that evaporates before dinner. By the end of these minutes together, you will know the difference between the meditation the world sells and the meditation God commands. You will never confuse them again. You will be able to sit across from a person selling you a hollowed-out spirituality, and something on the inside of you will straighten up and say, "No, that is the counterfeit. I have the real thing." You will understand why your prayers have felt thin, why you read a promise on Monday and cannot feel it by Tuesday, why the truth goes into your eyes, drops down about 6 inches, and dies somewhere north of your heart. You will understand the mechanism, not the emotion of it, the mechanism of it, the actual working spiritual law that governs how truth gets from the page into the deep places where it becomes real enough to change your body, your bank account, and your fear. You will learn to do with your mind what a farmer does with a field. You will learn to plant. You will learn what to plant. You will learn how to water it with your own mouth. And you will learn how to keep the birds from stealing the seed before it ever takes root. Here are the questions this teaching is going to answer, and I want you to hold them in your hand as we go. First, if meditation is not emptying the mind, then what on earth is it? And what did the Hebrew word actually mean in the mouth of the man who wrote it down? Second, why does filling the mind produce power while emptying it produces only a temporary calm that never holds? Third, what exactly are you supposed to fill it with, hour by hour, so that this becomes a life and not a mood? And fourth, how do you start today? In the next 24 hours, in a way you can actually keep, I am going to hand you 3 exercises before we are done. 3, not 30. 3 habits that the strongest men and women of faith who ever walked this earth used, whether they had words for them or not. And they are so simple that religion has walked right past them for 100 years, looking for something more complicated to feel holy about. You came here tired. I know that. You came here having tried the breathing and the apps and the 10 minutes of nothing. And you are still afraid. And you are still stuck. That ends not because you are going to try harder, but because you are about to stop doing the wrong thing and start doing the right one. There is a rest on the other side of this that the empty mind crowd will never find, because they are looking for it in a vacuum, and you were built to find it in a fullness. Stay with me. This is the teaching that reorders the rest. Now let me describe where you actually are, and I am going to do it with precision, because I think you are tired of being told vague things about your walk with God. You do not need vague. You need a diagnosis. Here is your condition. You believe the Bible. If someone asked you, you would say yes. Every word of it is true. You have a shelf of it. You have a phone full of it. You have heard 10,000 sermons on it. And yet, when the doctor calls, when the account overdrafts, when the marriage goes cold, when the fear comes and sits on your chest at 3 in the morning, the book might as well be on the moon. You know the promises are in there. You just cannot get them to come out of there and into here. You read a verse in the morning. You underline it. You feel a little lift. And by lunch you could not tell me what it said if your life depended on it. And in a sense, your life does depend on it. And it is gone anyway. That is not a memory problem. That is a meditation problem. And I will prove it to you before we are done. You have prayed prayers that felt like they hit the ceiling and slid back down the wall into a puddle at your feet. You have made confessions of faith with your mouth, while your heart stood off in the corner with its arms folded. Unconvinced, you said, "By his stripes I am healed." And a voice underneath said, "No, you are not. Look at you." You said, "My God shall supply all my need." And a voice underneath said, "Then explain the mailbox." And you have wondered whether the problem was that you did not have enough faith, or did not have enough sincerity, or whether God had simply decided to be silent toward you specifically. I am going to take all 3 of those off the table right now. Your problem is not a lack of sincerity. Nobody insincere loses sleep over their walk with God. Your problem is not a lack of faith, because Paul says God has dealt to every man the measure of faith. And every means every, and every includes you. And your problem is absolutely not the silence of God, because God is not silent. God said everything he had to say, and he wrote it down, and he sealed it in blood, and he is not going to shout new information over the top of a book you have not yet believed. So what is the problem? The problem is ignorance of a legal reality. And I do not mean ignorance as an insult. I mean it exactly the way the Bible means it when Hosea says, "My people are destroyed for lack of knowledge." Not lack of sincerity, lack of knowledge. There is a legal transaction that took place at the cross. And there is a legal channel through which the benefits of that transaction flow from the spirit realm into your actual life. And that channel is the renewed mind, and nobody showed you how the channel works. They gave you the deed and never taught you how to read it out loud until it became yours in your own understanding. Here is the central thing, and I want you to slow down and receive it. The truth of God does not become powerful in your life at the moment you agree with it. It becomes powerful in your life at the moment it dominates you. There is a difference between a truth you assent to and a truth that has taken up residence in the hidden man of the heart and now runs the place. Assent is a handshake. Domination is a marriage. And the process that moves a truth from handshake to marriage has a name. And the name is meditation. The world hears the word meditation and pictures a man on a cushion trying to think about nothing. That is the counterfeit. And it is a clever one, because it steals the word and empties it, which is exactly what it teaches you to do to yourself. But the meditation of the scriptures is the precise opposite motion. It is not a subtraction. It is a saturation. It is not the emptying of the mind. It is the flooding of it, on purpose, with a single truth, held and turned and chewed and muttered until that truth soaks past the intellect and stains the spirit. Think about what happens to an empty mind. You have felt it. You sit down to be still. You clear the room. And within 90 seconds, the room fills up on its own with the bills and the argument you had and the thing you should have said and the fear about next month. An empty mind is not a peaceful mind. An empty mind is an unguarded gate, and every anxious thought in the county walks right through it and sets up furniture. That is why the empty mind peace never lasts. You cannot rest in a vacuum. Nature abhors it, and so does your soul. The rest of God is not the absence of thought. It is the presence of the right thought. So full and so settled that the fearful thoughts cannot find a chair. You were never lied to about your need for peace. You were lied to about how to get it. They told you to pour the cup out. God told you to let it run over. And here is the part that should make you sit up. What God commanded Joshua, and what the first psalm describes, and what Paul later calls the renewing of the mind, is not a religious activity you do to feel spiritual. It is the single mechanism by which your born-again spirit takes command of your soul and your body and your circumstances. It is how the inward reality becomes the outward reality. It is the pump between the two worlds. And most believers have never once turned it on. Now let me take you into the text, because I do not want you to take my word for any of this. I want you to see it come up out of the King James Bible with your own eyes. Turn with me in your spirit to the first chapter of the book of Joshua. Moses is dead. The greatest leader the nation had ever known is gone. And a younger man is staring at a river he has to cross, and a wall he has to bring down, and an army he has to lead. And he is afraid. Of course he is afraid. And God does not hand him a sword first. God hands him a discipline of the mind. Listen to the 8th verse. God says, "This book of the law shall not depart out of thy mouth, but thou shalt meditate therein day and night, that thou mayest observe to do according to all that is written therein. For then thou shalt make thy way prosperous, and then thou shalt have good success." Now catch what God tied together in one breath. Meditation and the mouth. This book shall not depart out of thy mouth, and thou shalt meditate. In the mind of God, those two are the same activity. The meditation he is describing involves the mouth. It is not silent. It is spoken. Hold that, because we are coming back to it. And notice what he promises on the far side of it. Prosperity and good success, not as a reward for religious effort, as the natural harvest of a mind that has been saturated with the word until the man cannot help but walk it out. God is not bribing Joshua. God is describing a law. Fill the mind with this, day and night, and the outward life will follow the inward filling, as surely as a river follows its bed. Now let me define the word, because the word itself preaches. The Hebrew word translated meditate in that verse is the word hagar, and I want you to hear what it actually means, because it will end the confusion forever. Hagar does not mean to empty. Hagar does not mean to go blank. Hagar means to mutter, to murmur, to moan, to growl low in the throat. It is the sound of a man talking to himself under his breath, turning something over and over out loud. The same word is used in the book of Isaiah for the sound a lion makes over its prey. The prophet describes the young lion growling over the thing it has caught. That low, continuous, focused rumble. That is the word God chose for meditation. not the stillness of an empty temple. The growl of a lion who has caught something and will not let it go. Do you see it now? Biblical meditation is you catching a promise, standing over it, and growling it back to yourself until it is thoroughly yours. It is muttering the word under your breath in the car. It is turning one verse over and over on your tongue at the kitchen sink. It is chewing the way an ox chews the cud, bringing the same mouthful back up again and again until every ounce of nourishment is drawn out of it. That is meditation. It has a mouth, it has a sound, it is anything but empty. Now let the first psalm confirm it. Hear the second verse and the third. The psalmist describes the blessed man and says, "But his delight is in the law of the Lord, and in his law doth he meditate day and night. And he shall be like a tree planted by the rivers of water, that bringeth forth his fruit in his season. His leaf also shall not wither, and whatsoever he doeth shall prosper." There is that word again, day and night, and there is the result again. He shall be like a tree, planted, rooted, fruitful, unwithering, prospering in whatsoever he does. Where does the strength of the tree come from? Not from the branches, from the roots, sunk down into the water where no one can see them. Meditation is how you sink the roots. The leaves that everyone admires are just the visible proof of a root system. Nobody watched you build in the quiet hours. You do not get the tree by working on the leaves. You get the tree by feeding the roots, and you feed the roots by meditation, day and night. Now hear the proverb that tells you why this even works. In the 23rd chapter of the book of Proverbs, in the 7th verse, the wise man says of a person, "For as he thinketh in his heart, so is he." Read that again slowly. As he thinks in his heart, so he is, not as he thinks in his head. As he thinks in his heart, there is a thinking that happens up in the skull, quick and shallow, and there is a thinking that happens down in the heart, deep and slow and formative. And it is the second one that determines who you become. And meditation is precisely the act of moving a thought from the head down into the heart, from the shallow place to the deep place, from assent to domination. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. So if you want to change what you are, you must change what you think in your heart. And you cannot do that by trying. You can only do it by meditation. Now hear what Paul does with all of this under the new covenant. In the 12th chapter of the book of Romans, in the 2nd verse, he writes, "And be not conformed to this world, but be ye transformed by the renewing of your mind, that ye may prove what is that good, and acceptable, and perfect will of God." There is the whole thing in a single sentence. There are two forces pulling on your mind, conforming and transforming. The world is pressing you into its mold from the outside. Transformation comes from the renewing of the mind on the inside. And the word transformed there is the word from which we get the word metamorphosis, the total change of a creature from one form into another. The caterpillar into the thing with wings. Paul says that metamorphosis happens by the renewing of the mind, not the emptying, the renewing, the refilling with a new content until a new creature emerges. And so that you never think meditation is a leftover Old Testament practice we outgrew. Hear what Paul tells young Timothy plainly. In the first letter to Timothy, in the 4th chapter, in the 15th verse, he commands him, "Meditate upon these things. Give thyself wholly to them, that thy profiting may appear to all." The Greek word there carries the sense of practice, of premeditation. of turning something over with care, of rehearsing it until it is second nature. Give thyself wholly to them. Paul says, not a spare 10 minutes, wholly. And then he promises the same public harvest God promised Joshua. Thy profiting shall appear to all. The world will see the fruit of a thing you did in private with your mind and your mouth. And there is one more witness I want to set beside those, because it ties the mouth and the meditation together as tightly as a knot can be tied. Hear the closing verse of the 19th Psalm, the 14th verse, where David prays, let the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be acceptable in thy sight. O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Read that slowly. The words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart. He lays them side by side as a matched pair. The outward and the inward, the spoken and the pondered. And he asks that both together be acceptable, because David understood what the world's counterfeit will never understand. The mouth and the heart are one instrument. What you meditate in the heart comes out of the mouth. And what you speak with the mouth sinks back down into the heart, in a circle, feeding itself, either up into life or down into death, depending entirely on what you chose to put in the circle. The empty mind breaks the circle. It silences the mouth and blanks the heart and calls the broken instrument peace. But David wanted the instrument full and playing the right song. The words of the mouth and the meditation of the heart, moving together, acceptable to God, day and night. 6 witnesses now. Joshua, the psalmist of the first psalm. Solomon, Paul to the Romans, Paul to Timothy, and David in the 19th psalm. And every one of them describes the same motion. Fill, saturate, mutter, chew, renew. Not one of them describes an emptying. The empty mind is not in the book. It was smuggled in from somewhere else and handed to you wearing the same word. Now I want to tell you a story, and I want you to slow down for it, because this is the part I most want you to remember. And I am going to take my time. There was a man on the American frontier, generations ago, in the years when the land was being opened up and a man could claim ground if he was willing to work it. He was a hard worker, and he was poor, and he lived in a one-room cabin at the low edge of a wide piece of country. He grazed a thin cow on the flat near a muddy creek. He grew a little corn in a stony patch that gave him half of what he put into it. Every spring, the creek flooded his corn. Every summer, the creek dried up and left him hauling water in buckets. He worked from dark to dark, and at the end of every year, he was exactly where he had started, and often a little behind, and the lines on his face grew deeper. And he came to believe that this was simply the size of his life. A muddy creek, a thin cow, a stony patch, a tired back, and he was not a lazy man. That is the part that will break your heart if you let it. He was up before the light, and he was working after the dark. And he was honest. And he paid what little he owed. And he did not complain. At least not out loud. He had made his peace with poverty the way a man makes peace with a limp. He had decided that some men are born to the high, dry, rich ground, and some men are born to the low, wet, thin ground, and that he was one of the low ones. And that faith meant accepting it. His neighbors up the valley, on the good land, they prospered, and he did not envy them exactly. He just quietly assumed they had been given something at birth that he had not been given. Some better lot, Some better father, some better start. He looked up at the timbered ridge in the evenings sometimes, when the light went gold on it, and he thought it was beautiful, and he thought it belonged to somebody else. And he went back inside his one cold room, and he did not think about it again. That is the saddest sentence in the whole story. He looked at his own timber and admired it as another man's fortune. Now here is what the man did not know. Years before, his father had died and left him a paper, a deed, and the deed had been folded and put into a tin box. And the tin box had been pushed to the back of a shelf. And over the years the man had glanced at it exactly once, could not make much of the long words and the surveyor's lines, felt the old grief rise up looking at his father's hand, and closed the box and pushed it back. He knew the paper was there. If you had asked him, he would have said, "Yes, I have my father's deed," but he had never sat down and read it slowly, out loud, word by word, until he understood what it actually said. And so it governed nothing. It was true, and it was his, and it did him no good at all. One autumn, a surveyor came through, running new lines for the county, and he stopped at the cabin for water. And being a friendly and educated man, he asked the poor farmer whether he held title to his ground, and the farmer said, "I have my father's deed in a box, though I never made much of it." And the surveyor said, "Would you let me see it?" And the farmer, a little embarrassed, went to the back of the shelf and took down the tin box and blew the dust off the lid. And his hands were not steady, because it had been years since he had touched it. And the last time he had touched it, his father had not been long in the ground. He set it on the plank table between them. The lid stuck. He worked it loose. Inside was the brittle paper, folded in thirds, the creases gone soft and brown with age. And he lifted it out the way. You lift something you are half afraid will crumble. And he laid it flat, and the surveyor smoothed it with the side of his hand. And he bent over it in the low light, and he began to read it slowly, out loud, the way a man reads a thing he intends to understand. And this is the thing I want you to see. The farmer had held this exact paper in his own hands, years before, and had gotten nothing from it, because he had glanced and grieved and folded it back up. But the surveyor did what the farmer had never done. He read it word by word. He read the long words he did not rush past. He traced the surveyor's lines with his finger. He turned the legal language over and made himself understand it. He meditated on the deed, right there at the plank table, out loud. And the farmer stood behind his shoulder and heard his own inheritance read to him for the first time in his life, in a voice that actually understood it. And as he read, the surveyor grew quiet, and then he grew still. And then he looked up at the poor farmer with something like wonder on his face, because the deed did not describe the low, muddy flat by the creek. The deed described the whole valley. It ran the lines up over the ridge to the north, where the timber stood thick and tall and worth a fortune at the mill. It ran the lines east to the high spring, the deep, cold spring that never failed in the driest August. In the spring, the man had walked past 1,000 times on his way to haul muddy creek water in buckets, never once thinking it was his. It ran the lines south across the good bottomland, the black rich acres where a man could grow corn 10 feet high and never lose it to a flood. All of it, the timber, the spring, the bottomland, the whole valley, deeded in his father's name, and then in his, sealed and recorded and legal and beyond dispute. For as many years as the man had lived thin at the bottom of his own fortune, He had owned the spring the whole time he was hauling muddy water. He had owned the timber the whole time he was freezing in a one-room cabin. He had owned the bottom land the whole time he was fighting the stones for half a crop. Nothing about his condition was ever a matter of ownership. It was only ever a matter of knowledge. The deed had been true from the first day. It simply had never departed out of the tin box and into the man's mouth and mind. He had never meditated on it. He had never read it, day and night, until it reorganized his whole understanding of who he was and what belonged to him. And so a rich man lived and suffered and aged as a poor one, 6 feet from the paper that said otherwise. Now I want you to picture the moment the deed was read aloud. Picture the farmer's face as the surveyor's finger moved down the lines. Picture the flush that came up his neck. Picture him pushing back from the table and going to the door and looking out across that valley with brand new eyes. Seeing the timbered ridge that had always just been the edge of the sky suddenly become his timbered ridge. Seeing the far spring become his spring. The bottom land become his fields. Nothing outside had changed. Not one tree had moved, and everything had changed. Because the truth had finally departed out of the box and into the man. You are that man, and you are holding a deed you have never read out loud. You have the book. If someone asked you, you would say, yes, I believe the promises of God, and the promises are sitting in the tin box at the back of the shelf. Glanced at once, felt for a moment, folded up and pushed back, and so you live thin at the bottom of your own inheritance, hauling muddy water past a spring that has your name on it, freezing beside a fortune of timber, fighting the stones while the black bottom land lies open and unworked because you never read the deed slowly enough, out loud enough, day and night enough, for it to reorganize who you understand yourself to be. Meditation is the reading of the deed. Meditation is you, sitting down at the plank table with the Word of God unfolded, and going down the lines slowly, out loud, until the flush comes up your neck and you push back from the table and walk to the door and look out at your life with brand new eyes and say, all of this was mine the whole time. That is what we are doing here. We are getting the deed out of the box. Now let me take you to the cross, because the deed I am talking about was signed there. And I want you to see exactly what changed hands, and exactly what became yours the moment you believed. Here is the great exchange, and I am going to give it to you in matched pairs. The way a covenant is always written, this for that, this for that, so that you can never again mistake what you traded away and what you received. When Jesus went to the cross, he did not simply die instead of you. He was made to become what you were, so that you could be made to become what he is. That is the heart of it. The Bible says in the second letter to the Corinthians, in the 5th chapter, in the 21st verse, for he hath made him to be sin for us, who knew no sin, that we might be made the righteousness of God in him. Read the two halves of that verse. He was made sin. You were made righteousness. He took your identity so that you could take his. That is not poetry. That is a legal transaction, recorded, sealed, and beyond appeal. So here are the pairs. He took your spiritual poverty and he handed you his covenant wealth. The second letter to the Corinthians, in the 8th chapter, in the 9th verse, says of the Lord, that, though he was rich, yet for your sakes he became poor, that ye through his poverty might be rich. Poverty for riches, that is a clause in the deed. He took your sickness in his own body and he handed you his health. The prophet Isaiah, in the 53rd chapter, said, "With his stripes we are healed." Sickness for health. That is a clause in the deed. He took your condemnation and he handed you his righteousness, so that you could stand in the presence of God with no more sense of guilt than Jesus himself has. Sin, consciousness for righteousness, consciousness. Guilt for standing. That is a clause in the deed. He took your fear and he handed you his peace. He took your orphan status. That homeless, fatherless, striving loneliness, and he handed you the full legal position of a son in the family of God, with the family name and the family authority and the family resources. Orphan for son. That is the greatest clause of all. Now here is what I need you to see. And it is the whole reason we walked through the deed story first. All of that changed the moment you believed. Not a single one of those exchanges is pending. Not one is waiting on your improvement. The transaction is finished. The name at the bottom is signed in blood. It is your father's deed and now it is yours. Which means the question was never whether the timber and the spring and the bottomland belong to you. They do. The only question that was ever on the table is whether the deed has departed out of the box and into your mind and your mouth. Whether you have meditated on it day and night until it reorganized who you understand yourself to be. And there is one more clause in the deed that is the very center of everything we are talking about today. And I saved it for last on purpose. When you were born again, God gave you a new mind to think with. Hear it in the 2nd chapter of the 1st letter to the Corinthians, in the 16th verse, where Paul makes an almost unbelievable claim. He asks, "For who hath known the mind of the Lord, that he may instruct him?" And then he answers his own question with a thunderclap. But we have the mind of Christ. We have the mind of Christ. That is in the deed. That is a clause signed in blood. You were given, at the new birth, the very mind of Christ. A recreated capacity to know and to think and to see as he sees. And here is the tragedy that meditation exists to fix. You were given the mind of Christ. And you have been running your life on the old mind, the sense-ruled mind, the muddy creek mind, because nobody ever taught you how to draw on the mind you were given. The mind of Christ is in you the way the deed was in the box. It is legally yours and practically unused. And meditation is how you finally start thinking with the mind you were given instead of the mind you were born with. And now you see why meditation is not some optional spiritual hobby for the very devout. Meditation is the pump between the two worlds. In the spirit realm, in the finished work, in the legal record of heaven, you are already righteous, already healed, already provided for, already a son. That is the inward reality. That is the deed. But the inward reality does not automatically become the outward reality. Something has to move it from the record of heaven into the experience of earth. And that something is the renewed mind. That something is meditation. It is the channel. It is the pump. Turn the pump off. And a legally rich man lives poor at the bottom of his own valley. Turn the pump on. And the water of the spring finally comes up out of the ground and into the buckets and onto the corn. And the man begins to live like what he already legally was. This is why you can be genuinely born again, genuinely sincere, genuinely saved and heaven-bound, and still live defeated and afraid and broke. Your spirit was recreated in an instant at the new birth. But your mind was not. Your mind still has the old maps in it. Your mind still thinks you are a poor tenant on a muddy creek. And there is only one way to change the maps in a mind. And it is not to empty the mind. You cannot empty out a wrong belief. A wrong belief does not leave when you go blank. It is still there when you open your eyes. The only way to drive out a wrong belief is to crowd it out with a stronger true one. Planted deeper, watered longer, muttered louder, meditated day and night until the new map is the map the man drives by without thinking. That is the renewing of the mind. That is the great exchange being applied. That is the deed being read aloud at the plank table until the flush comes up your neck. So the exchange is finished in the spirit. And the meditation is how it comes home to the body and the bank account and the fear. He did his part on the cross once and for all. Your part is to read the deed until you believe it more than you believe the muddy creek. Stop working the stony patch by the flood line. Start reading the deed now. If this is true, and it is, you have to ask why so few believers ever walk in it. Why the church has largely lost this. Why you, sincere as you are, have been left hauling muddy water your whole life. And I am going to tell you plainly, because you are old enough to hear it. There are enemies of this truth, and I do not mean people. I mean forces, and they have names. The first enemy is religious tradition, not any one church. The spirit of tradition, that heavy, dusty thing that dresses up as reverence and specializes in taking the living word and freezing it into a ritual you perform without expecting anything. Tradition loves the empty mind, because a mind full of the living covenant is dangerous to tradition. A believer who has meditated the deed until it dominates him cannot be controlled by a system, cannot be kept small, cannot be kept dependent. So tradition teaches you to respect the book without ever expecting the book to do anything. And it calls that maturity. And it is not maturity. It is a muzzle. The second enemy is false humility, which is one of the most cunning things the devil ever invented, because it looks exactly like a virtue. False humility is the voice that says, "Who am I to claim all that? Who am I to say I am righteous? I am healed. I am a son with authority. Is that not arrogant?" And it wears the clothing of a lowly heart. But listen to me. If God signed the deed and put your name on it, then reading the deed out loud is not pride. Refusing to read it is not humility. It is unbelief with good manners. When God calls you righteous and you insist on calling yourself a poor miserable worm in the dust, you are not being humble. You are calling God a liar to his face and feeling holy while you do it. That is not lowliness. That is rebellion in a soft voice. True humility agrees with God about you. It takes what God says and repeats it, even when it feels too big. Especially when it feels too big. The third enemy is sense knowledge. And this is the big one. So hear it carefully. Sense knowledge is the knowledge that comes to you through your 5 senses. And it is not evil, but it is limited, and it is loud, and it lies about the invisible. Sense knowledge tells you what it can see and touch and measure, and then it insists that nothing else is real. Sense knowledge looks at the muddy creek and says, "This is your life, because this is what I can see." Sense knowledge reads the bank balance and says, "This is your provision." Sense knowledge feels the symptom and says, "This is your body." And sense knowledge is a terrible historian of the invisible, because it cannot see the spring on the far ridge. It cannot see the timber. It cannot see the deed. So it swears they do not exist. Meditation is how the recreated human spirit overrules sense knowledge. It is how revelation, knowledge, the knowledge that comes from God through the Word, grows louder in you than the report of your own eyes. And the empty mind counterfeit is so deadly precisely because it leaves sense knowledge in charge. Empty the mind, and the last voice you heard, the loudest voice in the room, the voice of the symptom and the balance and the fear, simply resumes when you open your eyes. Only a mind filled with the Word can silence the mind ruled by the senses. And behind all three, the worm of the dust mentality, the beggar mentality, the sin consciousness that keeps you on your knees, apologizing for existing instead of on your feet, enforcing a finished covenant. Somebody benefits from you staying small. It is not God, and it is not you. Ask yourself, who profits from a rich man who believes he is poor? Ask yourself, who profits from a son who believes he is an orphan? Ask yourself, who has spent your whole life whispering, "Do not read the deed. It is arrogant. Stay by the creek. This is all there is." That voice has a name, and it is not the voice of the Father. And the day you start reading the deed out loud is the day you find out exactly how much that voice was afraid of you all along. Now, I can hear you. Even as I say all this, I can hear the objections forming, because I have heard them from good people 1,000 times, and I would rather say them for you than let them sit in the back of your mind, unanswered. So let me speak your thoughts out loud, word for word, and then let me take each one apart. The first thing you are thinking is this: but I do not feel it. I can say I am healed. I can say I am righteous. I can read the deed out loud, and I do not feel one bit different. And it feels like I am lying to myself. Here is the answer. Feeling is the last thing to change, not the first. Feeling belongs to the senses. And we already established that the senses are the last part of you to get the news. When the farmer's deed was read aloud, the timber did not suddenly feel like his. His feelings had 30 years of Muddy Creek habit in them. What changed first was not his feeling. It was his knowledge, and his feelings followed his knowledge as he acted on it. Walked the new lines, cut the first tree, drank from the spring. You do not meditate the Word in order to feel something. You meditate the Word in order to know something, so deeply that eventually your feelings have no choice but to fall in line behind it. Faith is not a feeling. Faith is acting on the deed before the feeling ever shows up. The feeling is the caboose. Stop trying to drive the train from the caboose. The second thing you are thinking is this: but I tried this. I confessed the Word for a month and nothing happened. So it does not work. At least not for me. Here is the answer. You did not fail at meditation. You quit before the roots went down. Go back to the first psalm. The blessed man is like a tree planted by the water. And a tree is not a microwave. A tree is slow. And a tree is silent for a long time, while everything real is happening underground where you cannot watch it. You confessed the Word for a month, the way a man might water a seed for a month, and then, seeing no fruit above the ground, dig it up to check on it, and kill it. The lack was not in the Word. It was not even in your faith. It was in your understanding of the season. You expected the leaf before you had the root. Meditation is day and night. The Psalm says, not a day and a night. You do not get to plant a promise. Water it for 4 weeks, and then declare the whole covenant broken, because the corn is not 10 feet high in October. Sink the roots. Trust the season. The tree is coming. And the third thing you are thinking is this: and it is the deepest one. Is this not arrogant? Is it not proud to walk around declaring that I am righteous and healed and provided for and powerful? Should I not stay low? Here is the answer. And I want you to keep it forever. It is not arrogant to agree with God. Arrogance is a man exalting himself on the basis of his own merit. But you are not exalting yourself. You are agreeing with a verdict that God rendered about you at the cross, at infinite cost to himself, in the blood of his own Son. To refuse that verdict is not humble. It insults the price that was paid to give it to you. The proud thing, the truly arrogant thing, is to look at the deed God signed in blood and say, "No, I know better. I am just a poor worm by a muddy creek. My opinion of me outranks God's opinion of me." That is the arrogance. Humility bows its head and says, "If you say I am a son, then I am a son, and I will read the deed out loud, and I will not apologize for the size of what you have given me. So let me now put the tools in your hands, because everything up to now was diagnosis and doctrine. And diagnosis and doctrine that never becomes practice is just a sermon you will forget by lunch. And I refuse to let this be that. I am going to give you 3 exercises. 3. And I want you to notice that all 3 of them fill the mind. Not one of them empties it. And I am going to give each one a definition, a scripture, the reason it works, the common mistake that ruins it, and something you can actually do inside the next 24 hours. Get ready to work. The first exercise is this. Fill your mouth. This is the muttering. This is the hugger, the low growl of the lion over the prey. You take one verse, one promise, one clause of the deed, and you speak it out loud to yourself, under your breath, over and over, until your ears have heard your own voice say it so many times that it stops being a sentence on a page and starts being a conviction in your chest. The scripture for it is Joshua, chapter 1, verse 8. This book shall not depart out of thy mouth. And Romans, chapter 10, verse 17. So then faith cometh by hearing, and hearing by the word of God. Read those 2 together and you will see the machine. Faith comes by hearing, and the voice you hear most in a day is your own. So the fastest way to build faith is to arrange for your own ears to hear your own mouth speak the word of God more often than they hear it speak anything else. That is why it works. You are not informing God. You are renovating yourself. You are laying down a new track by repetition until the mind runs on it automatically. There is a deeper reason still that this works, and it comes from the Lord himself. In the 12th chapter of the book of Matthew, in the 34th verse, Jesus said, "For out of the abundance of the heart the mouth speaketh." Read that carefully, because it runs the machine in reverse and forward at the same time. Ordinarily, the mouth reveals what is already abundant in the heart. But the law also runs the other way. What you keep putting into the mouth, on purpose, day after day, becomes what the heart grows abundant in. You are using the mouth to load the heart, so that one day the heart is so full of the deed that it spills out of your mouth without effort, without a card, without trying. In the crisis, at 3 in the morning, when you have no strength left to perform, that is the goal. Not a confession you strain to make, a confession that pours out of you because the heart is finally full of it. The common mistake with this first exercise is that people mutter the word once. feel nothing, and quit. Or they mutter it with a tone of pleading, as though they are begging God to make it true. Stop begging. Start declaring. You do not confess the deed to talk God into signing it. He signed it 2,000 years ago. You confess it to talk yourself into believing what He already signed. So do not whisper it like a wish. Say it like a man reading a legal document he already owns. And there is a second mistake here, just as common, that quietly cancels the whole exercise. People will say the promise 10 times in the morning and then spend the other 23 hours of the day saying the opposite. They confess by His stripes, I am healed at the sink. And then they tell every neighbor and every relative all day long how sick and how tired and how run down they feel. And they wonder why nothing changes. You cannot plant in the morning and dig it up all afternoon. Watch the words that leave your mouth in the ordinary hours. Not just the words you rehearse on purpose. The whole day is your confession. Not just the 10 repetitions. Here is your assignment for the next 24 hours. Pick one promise. Just one. Make it short. By His stripes I am healed. Or, my God shall supply all my need. Write it on a card and put it where you stand at the sink or sit in the car. And every time you pass it, say it out loud 10 times. Slowly, with your own ears listening. Not 30 verses once. One verse 30 times. Depth, not breadth. Growl over the one thing you caught. Do that today. The second exercise is this. Build the image. Meditation is not only muttering with the mouth, it is picturing with the sanctified imagination. God gave you the capacity to see a thing on the inside before it exists on the outside. And the world has hijacked that faculty for fear, so that all day long you rehearse the disaster. You see the bad diagnosis. You see the confrontation going wrong. You see the account empty. And every one of those is a meditation. A dark one, a picturing of the thing you dread until it feels inevitable. I am telling you to take that same machine back and aim it at the deed. The scripture is the second letter to the Corinthians, chapter 10, verse 5. Casting down imaginations, and every high thing that exalteth itself against the knowledge of God, and bringing into captivity every thought to the obedience of Christ. Casting down imaginations. That means the picturing faculty is a battlefield, and God expects you to seize it. And Proverbs, chapter 23, verse 7. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he. The image you rehearse in the heart is the man you become. The reason it works is that the inward image sets the direction of the whole life, the way a rudder sets the direction of the whole ship. You will move, slowly and surely, toward the picture you hold most steadily on the inside. Hold a picture of yourself defeated, and you will drift toward defeat and call it fate. Hold a picture of yourself whole and free and standing in the finished work, and you will drift toward that and call it grace. And there is a scripture that will guard this exercise and keep it from drifting off into fantasy. And it is in the 4th chapter of the letter to the Philippians, in the 8th verse, where Paul gives you the exact list of what to picture. He writes, "Whatsoever things are true, whatsoever things are honest, whatsoever things are just, whatsoever things are pure, whatsoever things are lovely, whatsoever things are of good report, if there be any virtue, and if there be any praise, think on these things." That is not a suggestion to be positive. That is a command about what to feed the imagination. Think on these things. There is a list of things you are allowed to build images of. And the fear and the disaster and the worst case are not on the list. Paul is telling you to be selective about what you rehearse on the inside, because he knows the inward image becomes the outward man. The common mistake here is that people think this is fantasy or wishful daydreaming, so they feel foolish and stop. It is not fantasy. Fantasy is imagining something with no legal basis. This is different. You are not imagining something you wish were true. You are picturing something the deed already says is true, and letting your inward eyes catch up to the legal record. Here is your assignment for the next 24 hours. Tonight, before you sleep, close your eyes for 5 minutes and do not empty your mind. Fill it. See yourself well. See yourself standing in that hard conversation calm and unafraid. See the need met. Do not strain to make it feel real. Just hold the picture, gently and steadily, the way you would hold a photograph, and let the deed paint the scene. 5 minutes. Tonight. The third exercise is this: guard the gates and set the watch. This one is about the times of day, and it is drawn straight out of the command to Joshua. Day and night. The first thing your mind touches in the morning and the last thing it touches at night are not ordinary moments. They are the gates. Whatever you let in through those 2 gates gets the whole rest of the night and the whole first hours of the day to sink down and take root while your guard is lowest. And most people hand both gates to the enemy without thinking. The last thing they meditate on before sleep is the news, the argument, the fear, the phone full of other people's chaos. And then they wonder why they wake up heavy. The first thing they meditate on in the morning is the list of dreads waiting for them. And then they wonder why the day feels like a threat. The scripture is Psalm 1. Day and night, and the 92nd Psalm, in the first 2 verses, which speaks of showing forth God's loving kindness in the morning and his faithfulness every night. Morning and night, the 2 gates. Why it works is that the mind is most suggestible on the edges of sleep, in the drifting minutes going down and the drifting minutes coming up. And whatever you plant in that soft soil goes deepest. This is the very thing the world's counterfeit is quietly trying to exploit. By the way, the empty mind teachers know the edges of sleep are powerful soil, and so they tell you to go blank there, which does not leave the soil empty. It leaves it open to whatever seed the day dropped in last. And modern researchers have found something the book said all along. They have discovered that the brain physically rewires itself around repeated thought, that a groove worn by the same thought again and again becomes a well-traveled road the mind runs down automatically. Easier every time, until the man is not choosing the thought anymore. The thought is choosing him. They call it the way the brain reshapes itself with use. God called it meditation. Day and night. 3,000 years earlier. The science is only now catching up to the deed. You are not fighting your brain when you do this. You are using it exactly the way it was built to be used. Wearing a new groove on purpose. Laying down a road you actually want to travel. The common mistake is that people try to add a big new hour of Bible study in the crowded middle of the day. Fail to keep it because life is loud. And give up on the whole thing. You do not need a new hour. You need to reclaim 2 edges you are already living through anyway. And the other common mistake is that people guard the night gate and leave the morning gate wide open. Or the reverse. They will end the night in the Word and then wake up and reach for the phone before their eyes are fully open and let a flood of the world's fear and outrage and comparison pour straight into the freshest soil of the day. Both gates, or the enemy simply waits at the one you left unlocked. It does you limited good to seal the back door if you leave the front door standing open all night. Here is your assignment for the next 24 hours. And it is the simplest of all. Tonight, do not let the last voice you hear be a scream. Let the last thing that goes through your mind be one verse. The same verse you have been muttering, spoken softly as you close your eyes, so that it drops down into the soft soil and works all night. And tomorrow, before your feet hit the floor, before you reach for the phone, before you let the list of dreads in the gate, say that same verse first. Set the watch. Guard the gates. Let the word have the first word and the last word. And let the fear stand outside, knocking on a door that is already occupied. 3 exercises. Fill your mouth. Build the image. Guard the gates. Every one of them a filling, not an emptying. Do them not as a burden, but as a farmer sinking roots, knowing the tree is coming. And do the first one today, before the sun goes down, because a revelation you do not act on within 24 hours almost always dies as just another thing you once heard. Now let me show you what your life starts to look like when you actually live this way. Because I want you to be able to see it before you have it, which, as it happens, is the whole point. Picture the phone call. You know the one. The call that used to drop your stomach through the floor. The number comes up, and the old you would have felt the cold sweat and the racing heart before you even answered. Would have braced for the worst. Would have already rehearsed the disaster a dozen times. But you have been muttering the deed for a season now. You have sunk some roots, and the phone rings. And something is different. There is a quiet in you that was not there before. You answer, and you hear the hard news, and you notice, almost with surprise, that the panic does not come. In its place, there is a settledness, a low steadiness, the growl of the lion who knows what he has caught. And out of that quiet you find yourself saying, "We will handle this," and meaning it. Because the man answering the phone is no longer a poor tenant on a muddy creek. He is a son who has read the deed. Same phone, same bad news, completely different man. And you hang up and you say it out loud. Greater is he that is in me than he that is in the world. Picture the diagnosis, the word from the doctor that would once have defined your whole horizon, that would have moved into the center of your mind and rearranged all the furniture around itself and become the only thing you could think about. Day and night. A dark meditation running on a loop. But you have learned what to do with day and night now. And so the report comes. And you receive the report. You do not deny that the report was given. But you refuse to let it become your meditation. You take the doctor's counsel like a wise person. And you keep the appointments. And you do everything a wise person does. And at the very same time, on the inside, you will not let that report be the thing you mutter over in the soft soil at the edge of sleep. You put a different report in the soft soil. By his stripes I am healed. And the diagnosis, which wanted to be the loudest voice in your mind, finds that the seat is already taken. You stand in the same storm. You stand in it as a different person. And you say it out loud. This is not my meditation. His word is my meditation. Picture the empty account. The end of the month that used to feel like a wall coming toward you. The mailbox that used to feel like an enemy. The old you would have lain awake meditating on lack, rehearsing the shortfall, seeing the disaster in vivid detail behind your closed eyes, feeding the very fear you were dying to escape. But you have taken the picturing machine back now. You have aimed it at the deed. And so on the hard night you do not lie there painting the disaster. You lie there and you build the image the covenant gives you. You see the need met. You see yourself as the son of a father who owns the timber and the spring and the whole valley, and you go to work in the morning, not from panic, but from provision, and something in your posture has changed. And it changes what you notice and what you reach for and what doors you are willing to knock on. Same account, same end of the month. A man who is no longer begging, because a son does not beg his own father for what the deed already deeded him. And you say it out loud, "My God shall supply all my need according to his riches in glory." Picture the 3 in the morning. That is the hour that used to own you. The house is dark and everyone is asleep, and there is nothing to distract you. And the fear used to come and sit right down on your chest in that hour and start its meditation, running the loop of every dread, every regret, every worst case, in vivid and merciless detail. And you would lie there and let it, because you did not know you had any other option. And you would greet the dawn exhausted and defeated before the day even started. But now the 3 in the morning finds a different man. The fear still comes and knocks. It will always come and knock. But now, in that dark and open hour, instead of lying there, letting the fear run its loop, you reach in the dark for the verse you have been muttering, and you begin, quietly, under your breath, so as not to wake the house, to growl it back to yourself. By his stripes I am healed. My God shall supply all my need. As a man thinks in his heart, so is he, and you fill that open, suggestible 3 in the morning soil with the deed instead of the dread. And somewhere in the muttering, the weight lifts off your chest, and you find, to your own amazement, that you drift back down into sleep with the words still moving on your lips. Same dark hour, new occupant, and in the morning you say it out loud. He giveth his beloved sleep. That is what life looks like now. Not a life with no storms, a life where you stand in the storm from a settled place. Because your mind is not empty and blowing around in the wind like a leaf. Your mind is planted, rooted, full, a tree by the rivers of water. And the storm can shake your branches all it wants, but it cannot move your roots, because you sank them down into the deed in the quiet hours when nobody was watching. Same weather, new tree. Now I have to give you a warning, because I love you too much to send you off with only the good part. And because there is a cost to walking away from this that you need to count honestly, here is the warning. This truth does not stay warm forever. If you hear it, and you feel the flush come up your neck, the way the farmer felt it at the plank table, and then you fold the deed back up and push it to the back of the shelf and go back to hauling muddy water, something quietly hardens. The voice that spoke to you today speaks a little more faintly the next time, not because God withdraws it in anger, but because a conscience that is shown the light and turns from it grows a callus over the place where the light touched. The Bible warns of a conscience that becomes seared, gone dull to the very thing that once pierced it. And I have watched it happen to good people. They heard the deed read once. They wept at the plank table. And then life got loud. And the tin box went back on the shelf. And 10 years later, they are still by the muddy creek. Only now, they cannot even remember why the valley once looked so full of promise. The tragedy is not that they were poor. The tragedy is that they were rich the whole time and let the knowledge of it slip through their fingers. Do not be the man holding the goat while the spear rusts in his hand. Do not be the man who owns the spring and dies of thirst hauling muddy water because reading the deed felt like too much trouble on a tired Tuesday. The years do not come back. You cannot go back and replant the tree you never planted 20 years ago. But hear me. and hear the relief inside the warning. The best time to plant the tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is today. Before the sun goes down, the dimming voice you have been ignoring is not gone. It spoke loudly enough to get you all the way to the end of this teaching, which means it is still strong, which means the callus is not yet a wall, which means today, right now, you can take the tin box off the shelf and unfold the deed on the plank table and begin. Urgency is not despair. Urgency is a father shaking your shoulder because the inheritance is real and the clock is real, and he does not want you to sleep through your own life. Wake up. Read the deed. Today, now I want you to do something with me. And I want you to actually do it, not just hear it. Put your hand on your chest. Right now, wherever you are, if it is safe to do so, lay your hand flat over your own heart, over the hidden man of the heart, over the place where, as a man thinks so, he is. And I want you to say these words out loud after me, not as a wish, but as a man reading his own deed at the plank table. Say them slowly. Let your own ears hear your own mouth. This is your first meditation, and it starts now. I am not empty. I am filled. I am a new creation, and my spirit already knows the truth. I have the mind of Christ, and I am renewing it day and night. I refuse the empty mind. I choose the full one. I take one promise, and I growl over it like a lion over his prey. The word of God will not depart out of my mouth. I fill my mouth. I build the image. I guard the gates. I am righteous, because God said it. And I agree with God. I am healed, because his stripes made it so. And I agree with God. My need is supplied, because my Father owns the whole valley, and I am his son. I stop begging. I start reading the deed out loud. I am a tree planted by the rivers of water. My roots are going down where no storm can reach them. Whatsoever I do shall prosper, because I meditate therein day and night. I have read the deed, and I will never live like a poor man on a muddy creek again. Leave your hand there one more moment. Feel that steadiness. That is not emotion. That is your spirit finally getting a word in edgewise. Remember it. You just did the very thing this whole teaching was about. You filled your mind, and nothing moved in to steal the seat, because the seat was full. Now here is what I want you to do before you go anywhere else. Down in the comments below, I want you to type 2 short declarations, and I want you to type them in the first person, so that your own eyes see your own hand. Write them. Type these words: my mind is not empty. It is full. And then type this: I am reading the deed today. Type both of those right now, before you close this, because the confession of the mouth is the first exercise, and you might as well begin it in the comments, where the seed is planted in public and the roots start going down where you cannot take them back. And if this put the deed back in your hands, if you felt the flush come up your neck at the plank table, then do not wander off and lose the trail. Subscribe to this channel and turn on the notifications, every one of them, so that the next revelation teaching does not slip past you in the noise. Because we are getting these deeds out of the box one at a time, and I do not want you to miss a single clause of your inheritance. The scriptures I preached from today are waiting for you in the description below. Every reference, so you can open your own Bible and read the lines for yourself, slowly, out loud, until they are yours. You were told to empty your mind. You know better now, so go fill it. Fill it with the deed. Fill it day and night, and live. At last, like the rich son you were the whole time. Read the deed out loud today, and do not stop until the whole valley knows your name.